Many analysts were predicting the demise of the euro area this time last year. The expectation was that Greece would be the first country to exit the union by March of 2012. And this was to be followed by Portugal, Spain, and possibly Ireland. So what has happened since? Is the concept of the European Monetary Union fact or fiction? Chris Hart from Investment Solutions joins us to weigh in. Well, Chris, where are we now? We're almost at the end of 2012 and nothing...
Well, the first thing is don't underestimate the capacity of the authorities to actually kick the can down the road. And I think we've had that to a large extent where Draghi has said he'll take he'll do whatever it takes to actually save the euro. I must say, when it comes to the eurozone problem, however, I do believe that the problem itself is not the euro. Although people want to focus on the euro creates a rigidity which helps to expose the weaknesses sooner than, say, they would be exposed in a fully flexible system like you've got in the US or UK or Japan. But it doesn't mean that those problems don't exist in the UK, US and Japan. And it doesn't mean that, any problems will actually affect the euro. The euro is a political creation, and the politicians have still got quite a strong resolve and strong, political capital invested in this particular project. Now, I actually believe at the core of it is not so much the euro, but the actual welfare state. In other words, the problems would surface with or without the euro. Sooner or later. The euro's just made it probably a bit sooner.
Warren, jump in there.
I think Chris, we understand. Okay, we can talk about the philosophical question about the welfare state and democracy within a welfare state. Can democracy in a welfare state work? But what I wanted to just concentrate on for a second is Greece. It was expected by not just one or two, but a few analysts last year that March was going to be the tipping point. There was a bailout that was going to go into Greece. Greece had to come up with the money, and if they didn't, then the European Union was going to call it quits. We're not lending you any more money. What's happened with the fiscal position of Greece? And as I understand it, it's deteriorated.
It's still deteriorated.
Have they just continued to lend to Greece?
That is correct. And basically the Greek problem is coming back right now again, okay, because they're again running out of money, as they would. And as I say, the solution is not to raise tax rates, because as you raise tax rates, you exacerbate the problem. It's like a household. If you're spending more than what you're actually getting in, you will be financially distressed. The solution stabilizes very quickly once you start spending less than what's coming in. And in fact, the situation repairs itself very quickly, but it stabilizes once you do that. But to do that, you've actually got to reduce your welfare state. And that's where it becomes politically very difficult, because you've got charlatans that will say you can't have austerity and that kind of thing, or we're going to deliver you from austerity like the French president did, etc. And in fact, Papandreou did as well. When he came to power in Greece, he said, we're going to actually end the austerity. And they said, where's the money going to come from? He said there is money. And that's where he discovered very quickly there wasn't.
The bottom line, the European Union isn't going anywhere?
Again, the Greeks will disappear out of the Eurozone once the politicians lose their will to keep Greece in the Eurozone.
But on that note, Chris, this time last year, if I'm not mistaken, Sarkozy was the president in France.
Yes.
Now we've gone even further left in France. Yes. If you look at Hollande, he's even more to the left than Sarkozy was.
Yes.
So, to me, that says, how's this going to survive? He's refusing to implement austerity in France.
Basically.
But everybody's been saying it's not going to survive, and yet it has. Or is it?
Well, no, the point is Draghi himself, that's of the ECB, stepped in and said he'll do whatever it is. So that means everybody's playing a waiting game. Let's see if this will actually pan out. The trouble is there are schisms within the Eurozone, and as I said, the Euro will survive as long as the political will is there for it to survive. Now Hollande is still going to discover that he's going to export his tax base, and is busy doing that. So by March, the tax revenues will have already plunged because he raised the tax rates. And the rich will just sort of move to other parts of the Eurozone, and that's in a sense the strength and the weakness, in the sense that you cannot have stupid, daft policies as the French are imposing and get away with it, because effectively your capital will flee. And that's what's going to bring France onto the chopping block very quickly. Hollande is going to deliver the biggest austerity to the French that they've had in generations, despite his election promises. That's why I call him a charlatan.
Okay, but let's just take a step back here, and just in terms of the European Union, politicians are in control of this whole process.
Yes.
But the market is buying it, because the yields on these bonds,
Exactly.
we saw the Spanish bond touch 7%, and it was panic stations for everyone, because we all knew Spain can't afford their debt at 7%.
Yes.
It's come down, it's now below 6, I think the last time I saw.
5.5 roughly, yeah.
So the market's buying it. So are we just playing smoke and mirrors? Is the market and the politicians still playing smoke and mirrors?
Don't think private sector investors are jumping in feet and all into the Spanish bond market. That's not what's happening. Remember, it's the ECB that is there as a backstop, because they're busy helping to fund the Spanish banks, who are then buying the actual Spanish debt.
So the ECB is propping up the market effectively?
The ECB is intervening in the market, very much so, in a variety of ways, and that's what's helped to stabilize the situation. Have we resolved the situation? No. I believe the Eurozone is still unstable and deteriorating, because the consumption, the wealth consumption, as opposed to wealth production, is still not in the right balance.
Now let's contrast Europe with India. You've recently just come back from a trip in India.
Huge problems in India, in the sense that if you try and get what's uppermost on people's mind, firstly it's complex. You don't get a single answer, but corruption and regulation, in other words red tape, is really uppermost, because they've already experienced what happens when you lift some. And when in 91, when they actually had a major crisis and they were able to actually cut through a lot of it, lifted some red tape, the energy of the economy just surged. You can actually see that from, in terms of what the performance of that economy. And now we're getting to the stage where they need a lot more reforms to actually take red tape away. India is not an easy place to do business, especially in a formal business sector point of view. In informal business, I think it's fairly easy, and that's what absorbs a lot of Indian labour is, in fact, the informal sector. But
Sounds a lot like Africa.
Yeah, but of course the authorities would like it to formalise, but a lot of the barrier to formalisation of businesses is in fact red tape. Chris, and that's what needs to be resolved.
Okay, so red tape, the bureaucracy is one thing. How about the development of different types of infrastructure in India? Is that actually a bottleneck yet, in terms of physical infrastructure and IT infrastructure?
Physical infrastructure is an enormous bottleneck, and what the strategy that they've employed is to actually do private partners, PPPs, private-public partnerships are the rage. And as it's happening, for instance, we saw one company, it's an infrastructure company, they're busy building 5 or 6 power stations, and they've got another 2 or 3 sort of on the planning stage, etc. Now, to do it, there's a lot of corruption. And they would say, well, it's at this stage, it's not where we come in. But whatever the case is, but the point is, they're not the only ones. There's a few of them doing that, right? And they're building roads, etc. And you just think, in South Africa, by retaining a monopoly, our state-owned enterprise can only get really 2 very reluctantly off the board, and there's all sorts of hassles, etc. They've got just quite a few power stations being built because they've actually releasing the sector rather than constraining it. So they've already learned that too much control is in fact damaging, and they're trying to actually find ways of extricating the state from businesses. Even in banks, state-owned banks where the state owns more than 50%, they're listed, etc., you find that those banks have got much lower PEs than the private banks, because the private banks can make proper commercial decisions. And we can see that in our own telecommunications industry, where Telkom sits and where Vodacom and MTN sit in terms of valuation, the actual destruction of value that the state actually brings to the table.
So you came away with a tangible appreciation, first of all, of an economy that is reforming in some regards, and the fact that infrastructure is being built in India.
Yes.
So it's begun that path.
Strong lesson that the free market works. It works actually very, very well and very powerfully, and that's where you actually see the state intervention, and as the dead hand gets released, so the energy of the economy gets comes through as well, and that they're butting their heads, not because of the lack of will or lack of opportunity, but it's what the bureaucrats prevent happening. And often industries are actually coming into a space sort of 10 years ago this was not allowed. Now it is allowed, and we're coming in, and as the regulation actually becomes
we're running out of time,
yes.
and I want to do a little bit of jumping around in terms
Yes.
of geography here. Of course, the US, we've all been election out, I think,
Yes.
and the Democrats are in. Obama serves a second term. What does that mean?
So that means the monetary policy, it means that Bernanke or Bernanke clones will continue in the actual...
You mean helicopter Ben has still got free reign?
something like that. In other words, that with him, either he gets reappointed for a second term, or his how can you say, most promising protege, which is probably Janet Yellen, as far as I can make out, will be appointed in when Bernanke's term comes up. It means that you probably, to compensate for the fiscal cliff, you're probably going to have the central bank being more decisive than the actual political process, and that means the quantitative easing, in my opinion, will be raised from 40 billion purchases a month maybe to 60 billion, etc. It does mean that the dollar is going to be vulnerable, right? And it's not sure where the stock market's going, but we do know that will actually benefit maybe the rand. It will help to stabilize the pressure on the rand will at least alleviate, but you will also find your precious metals, hard assets doing relatively well. It does look like the Chinese downturn may be stabilizing. I haven't, in the last, say, 2 months, picked up that it's deteriorating further than what it had already done. And that means that maybe we're seeing a commodity underpin, and the huge divergence that we're seeing in South Africa between, say, retailers and your resource shares may actually close a little bit.
Final question from you.
Are you still a gold bull?
Very much so, sure.
Didn't you get that gentle little hint? Hard assets are going to do well. He's talking gold.
Yes, very much
and
so.
Gold
How
equities
gold?
as well.
Very much so. It's difficult to say when gold equities might kick up, but you may well find a difference in performance between South African gold equities and offshore gold equities.
I'm willing to bet that if we were to search your room under your mattress, you have got Kruger Rands. We'll leave it there for another day.
Yes.